This is Defenders TV Podcast, Episode 51, looking at Agent Carter, Season 2, Episode 7, Monsters. Welcome back, Defenders, to Defenders TV Podcast as we move into our second bicentennial section of podcasts on episode 51. And we are going to be looking at the episode Monsters, which is part of season 2 of Agent Carter, episode 7. I am one of your hosts, John.
And I'm your other host this week, Derek. Welcome back.
Welcome back indeed, everyone. And we hope you've been enjoying Agent Carter as much as we have. Again, this was a bashed out of the park episode for me. Really, really good. Loads of intrigue, loads of tension, and obviously loads of the holy trinity of superb TV ladies, which was Peggy, Whitney, and Dottie.
Absolutely, yeah. Really good episode. And also this week we got a trailer for Captain America Civil War. So lots of discussion about that. We're going to discuss that after the discussion about this episode. We're going to have a chat about the Civil War trailer. We are aware of a few of our listeners who are trying to stay spoiler free for Civil War. That's probably the final trailer that they'll be watching. Probably similar to ourselves. I don't want to get too much more spoiled, but there's some interesting stuff to talk about in the trailer, which we'll talk about just after this episode discussion.
But remember, you can find our podcast on defenderstvpodcast.com/iTunes. Or you can search any other good podcast catcher such as Podcast Addict or Beyond Pod. Just search Defenders TV Podcast. Subscribe, leave a review. This helps other people find our podcast specifically on iTunes and some of the other podcast catchers. And we will obviously pop lovingly into your ears every time we release a podcast. Yeah. And of course, we also have our Facebook group that you can join. Just search Defenders TV Podcast. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter at DefendersCast.
Yeah, we're getting close to our Daredevil coverage starting out on the 18th of March. So as John mentioned, just it'd be great to get some more reviews up on iTunes as we get closer to that. And obviously for the rest of our Agent Carter coverage, because it does help more listeners find us. Speaking of that, we do have a review on iTunes this week that came in from Brooke in Kansas, who says, "This is such a great podcast. Their enthusiasm for the show is so wonderful to hear. I love the format of the 5 points that they use from each person to discuss their viewpoints about each particular episode that they talk about. I love Agent Carter and greatly recommend these fellas. These guys are always a joy to listen to. Keep up the awesome work. Thanks." Thank you so much for that, Brooke. That's really nice of you.
Yeah, thank you, Brooke. It's really nice to get the feedback. It really helps us determine how we do the show. And, you know, anything we can do to improve it is always welcome as well. So thank you so much for that feedback and for the review on iTunes.
And as John mentioned, if you want to send us in any feedback about how we do the podcast even, or the episodes that we cover, or as you go through Daredevil, if you want to send in your thoughts about each episode as you go, send those thoughts into feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com.
Absolutely. But with that, we move on to our 5-point discussion of Agent Carter, episode 7, entitled Monsters. Derek, what have you got for us?
Yeah, this episode was written by Brandon Easton, first time writer for Agent Carter, newly brought into the fold, with Brandon Easton joining the team for season 2 of the show. The episode was directed by Metin Hussein, a British director based from London, who directed episodes of Outlander, Borgia, and Shameless. Might explain some of the little jokes we'll be talking about later on throughout the episode. John, do you want to tell us what they gave us in this episode?
Absolutely. Chadwick's murder at the hands of Whitney Frost is spun as just another lost-at-sea accident of the rich and famous in LA, as Frost appears distraught, clothed in black and veiled. However, beneath her veil lies another reality, as Manfredi is made her second in command, and Vernon Masters is tasked to break Dottie Underwood. But after many used vials of sodium pentothal, Masters is reassigned and tasked to recover the uranium rod stolen by Peggy Carter from Roxham, as Frost interrogates Dottie herself using more effective methods of torture. Elsewhere, as Frost uses her intel to hunt for even more dark powers, Peggy plots a rescue mission for Underwood as her necklace tracker reactivates, hinting at a possible location and, of course, trap. Undeterred, Peggy, Jarvis, and the Jitterbug infiltrate Manfredi's compound to release Dottie, and the trap is sprung. But it is sprung against Dr. Jason Wilkes, who, unguarded, is kidnapped at gunpoint from Howard Stark's residence by Frost and Manfredi. In the ensuing escape and commotion, a familiar friend is caught in the crossfire, and Dottie escapes once again into the wind.
Yeah, really great episode this week. Lots of stuff going on. Once again, I love these episodes where there's layers and layers of elements put in and loads of stuff to talk about. Before we kick into it, some of our longer term listeners may be aware we don't have Chris with us again this week. Unfortunately, things just haven't worked out in times that where Chris is available to join us for our episodes. He will be back. He's not left the podcast, we promise. He's just been very busy with work and unfortunately unable to speak this week because he lost his voice due to a lot of work. And
there is a serious dose of man flu going around. I am kind of just finished a load of antibiotics from a secondary issue with the man flu that I got, but I mean it's wiped me out for 3 weeks. Absolutely. You may have heard a more muffled sound from me of late. That's probably due to the amount of blocked noses that I've had of late.
Aye.
But yeah,
Chris will be back.
Chris will be back. It is only man flu, of course, and we will recover.
Absolutely. John, do you want to kick us off with your first point of your 5 for this episode of Agent Carter?
Absolutely. I really liked Vernon Masters in this. There were a couple of elements here that I just thought really expanded his character. You know, he's kind of come into the SSR, whether in New York or LA, kind of stomping around, exerting his authority. There's obviously the mentoring role that he's doing with Chief Jack Thompson. And of course, there's his involvement with the Arena Club. But the level of that involvement, I think, kind of really sort of became apparent here, where now there's this connection and relationship with Whitney Frost, where she is ordering him around. You know, let's not forget, this is a high-ranking FBI official of the government being bossed around by an unelected, nefarious body, which now is also being commanded by Whitney Frost, who is infiltrated with this Zero Matter. So this was a really interesting connection. And it does seem to me that Whitney Frost values him as essentially as a pack horse to do the work. He doesn't seem to be in her council. That seems to be left to Manfredi, and she is very much putting her trust into Manfredi and not Vernon Masters, whereas I think, and from what I can gather, Masters would have been the guy that the Council of Nine would previously have put their trust in.
Right.
So I thought this was really interesting. And then we also get a bit of backstory as he goes into torturing Dottie. And this I just really liked, in particular with the sodium pentothal truth serum that was being used. And how he just feels that, again, it's that kind of machismo where he feels, because he's a man, that this is going to be easy. And he, you know, starts injecting, Dottie, and she's like, it's like mother's milk. I thought this was really good. It showed the toughness of Dottie. You know, she goes, go on, ask me another question. You're almost there, just almost baiting him. I really, really liked that. And, you know, Vernon Masters kind of makes the point that, you know, he has dealt with women before in an interrogation setting, and he kind of references back to World War II and a concentration camp's officer's wife and trying to get information from her. And I love that Dottie's response is that I'm no Nazi harlot. I've burned myself with a blowtorch. I've pulled out my own teeth, nails, and hair. You know, this truth serum is like mother's milk, as I've said. And she can handle interrogation and torture big time. And I love the fact that, again, Whitney Frost comes in, sees that he is not doing it. He really is not doing it. And she goes, this requires a woman's touch. And that moment where she just strokes his cheek with the back of her hand, his reaction to that, because he doesn't know whether he's suddenly going to get sucked into her body from the zero matter, is just really, really great. It's just lovely and subtle. Loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
I think this was a really nice episode for Vernon Masters and his relationship with the remaining council members, but in particular with Dottie and Whitney Frost. It really shows his character. And he's not the big gun like you think he is when confronted with people who are much more confident about themselves and much more in control of their own destiny. Loved it.
Yeah, absolutely. This was also my first point as well, because of it's a great interaction moment between Dottie and Vernon Masters. We learn so much more about him. We think that he's the bureaucrat, really, from the first couple of episodes. We feel that he was kind of standing on the shoulders of other people. What this shows us is that he's done deep interrogation before. He's a pretty brutal kind of character, you know. To be the person that is interrogating or is torturing people to get information out is something that I wasn't expecting behind the Vernon Masters character so far. But I love how Dottie calls it out to him and says, you're trying to be confident and strong. You're trying to show me that you're able to do this. Yet all I can see is fear, because of the blonde haired woman that holds your leash, which I love that Dottie, regardless of the fact that, she doesn't actually know Vernon Masters and how brutal he could be. She's called him out on it immediately. She can see it in his eyes that he's not able to do this, that he is just using the machismo, to kind of carry himself, I suppose. Yeah, lovely scene. Really, really enjoyable.
I love the fact that nothing surprised her. You know, he lays out all his tools of torture and she goes, "Oh, how romantic. It's our first date." Like everything he is showing her, everything that he is using to try and intimidate her, she's seen before and it is not fazing her. This was really, really good.
Yeah.
Great scene. And a great scene then also, as I say, with Whitney and Vernon as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Derek, what's your second point then?
Yeah. My second point is actually about Jason Wilkes in this episode. Some big changes for Jason, this episode.
Which one is he's solid for a large portion of this episode?
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. So quite cool that he's got the ability to build a machine, which Whitney Frost calls out is a huge achievement for one person on their own without the support of Isoline that he would have had to work on the Zero Matter. Essentially, Whitney calls out that he is a hugely intelligent guy. But really the scene I'm speaking about is kind of an answer to a question that we had in last week's podcast about what happens to him when he goes into the Wraith world, as we called it. When he phases out of reality and disappears into this Wraith world. It's created a huge change in Jason Wilkes. And the big moment for this is where he's talking to Peggy and Peggy's saying that she's going to go back in and save Dottie Underwood. And his reaction to that is quite visceral.
He really cracks. I mean, you see he's under a huge amount of pressure. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, but it's even more than that. He specifically says to Peggy, let her die. You have the way of flicking the kill switch, taking out Dottie. Why not do it? She's just the villain of the piece, effectively. She's someone that you've wanted to capture. She's someone you want to put in prison. Why don't you just kill her? He says, I'm not talking about just life or death here. I'm talking about something much worse than that, which presumably is effectively the Wraith world, which is kind of like hell, is what it looked like. It looks like he's going to be transported to another location, if he does phase out for the final time. And he wants everybody to be focused on the fact that he needs to stay within this world. So it's interesting to see the side of Jason Wilkes, because this could form some kind of motivation for him to join up with Whitney Frost in future, you know, to try and keep himself alive and try and keep himself out of going to that other place that we saw in the last episode.
Yeah, it's a desperation absolutely coming on to Jason Wilkes. It's certainly one of my points as well. You know, we really do see that change in him. You know, he's pressured, he's becoming selfish because he wants to get better. He wants to sort of remove himself from this threat of entering the Wraith world. And all he can hear is Jarvis and Peggy putting their energies and efforts into, essentially rescuing someone who is a killer, is a traitor in the eyes of the American government, who is a spy from another country. So here we have he's seeing where he's not the priority, and that is that becomes too much for him. And I really like that, but I like the flip side of Anna Jarvis, really helping him in the construction of that machine.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he seems to really appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's really good. I mean, even in terms of the meal that they have together is a really nice little touch.
It is.
That kind of bond that they've created between the two of them.
Absolutely. Have you ever fancied crying into a bottle of $1,000 wine? I like that little touch. That's quite funny because they're clearly using Harrod's stash of wine. But there is also, I don't know whether I would call Wilkes selfish in this. I think he's just desperate.
But that's what I mean. I mean, there's a selfishness coming from the desperation.
Yeah, because he does call it out to Anna that he's phasing in and out more often than he used to. So he's probably feeling that he only has a very, very limited amount of time to get this done.
He's scared. He's frightened. Yeah. And that's what I mean. He's becoming focused on his own self-being and worth.
Exactly. So he's probably saying, I've got, 2 days here. How about you wait for those 2 days, see if you can help me out, and then maybe go and save Dottie if that's what you want to do. But I've only got a limited amount of time. If you guys go off and try and save Dottie, get captured as they end off doing, perhaps they're not going to have time to save him within that period of time.
Absolutely.
That's all I have about that particular point of Jason Wilkes, but there is one other element of Jason in this episode, which I loved, which you kind of mentioned, where he does come back to solidity. I love that the first thing that he does when he comes back into the real world is kiss Peggy Carter, and thereby complicating her entire life. He's waited for it from their first date that they had in episode 2. He's waited for this moment. He's been hanging around her the whole time. He mentions the frustration that he's had, and she mentions it as well in one of the other episodes. And the first thing he does is kiss Peggy Carter in front of Jarvis and Anna. Anna seems to be pretty happy with this situation. Jarvis calls it out that this has now complicated her entire life.
Well, he's kind of got awkward looks. He's kind of like looking around at that particular moment in time. But yeah, he certainly calls it out later.
Yeah.
And that was really nice. Like, what are the two first things that he does? He kisses the woman that he's been trying to sort of woo before he was infected with the zero matter from the explosion at Isodyne. Mm-hmm. He tries to make that right, and he's also starving. Yeah. I love the fact that, he is absolutely famished, and really hungry. I love as well this contraption that they've built. It just reminds me of 1970s Doctor Who, quite frankly.
Very much so.
And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's like a modern take on that with all the tubing and the neon purple. Mm-hmm. It just really did look Doctor Who 1970s. I really liked it though. I loved actually that it seemed to reflect the jukebox that's in the laboratory as well. So there's this neon vibe about it, which that kind of fits with that whole 1950s vibe as well. So I really liked this. To me, this was kind of a bit retro and nice actually.
Yeah.
And certainly as a Doctor Who fan, I could see yes, I could see the hand of the BBC involved in this contraption, and its design.
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned the jukebox. I have to say, ever since Claire Laffer, who was a guest on our show in episode 5, ever since she mentioned the jukebox in Harrod's study, I can't stop noticing it. I definitely want to get one of those as well.
Absolutely. But as well, speaking of famished, I am going to segue into Peggy Carter going from famine to feast, as Jarvis mentions later on in the car as they're heading over to rescue Dottie. This was a really nice, lovely scene between the two of them. It really opened up Peggy's vulnerable, intimate side as well, something that you don't see. She very much emotionally will be a closed book, whether that's stiff upper lip British style or whether it's just that she's getting the job done and she's very matter of fact about getting the job done. We know she has feelings for Suzo, we know she has feelings for Wilkes, but she is prepared to subsume them for the job, for the task at hand. And we saw that with Steve Rogers as well. It can hurt her terribly, but she will try and hide that from view. And I loved here that we got that window into the more intimate side of Peggy Carter, and that it's brought about by Jarvis. He probably can tell and realizes that she needs to talk about these. And I love the fact that Jarvis has eavesdropped. He's heard the conversation between Sousa. He's fully up on that. He's trying to fill the silence. So he's whittering on about, everything that's happened. Mm-hmm. And of course, Peggy then applies the brake forcefully, and they have the conversation. And it's a really nice thing that Jarvis says to her, where he says, "You don't understand your allure, Miss Carter." Really, really nice. And she says, "I don't know what to do." We have Peggy, absolutely in two minds. She's obviously still got, feelings for Sousa. She now knows that, his fiance has called it off because she has seen that connection between Sousa and Peggy. Yet we have, Wilkes kissing her, and trying to fulfill his relationship with her that started off in episode 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And as Jarvis rightly points out, there is, on the one hand, Wilkes' incandescent smile, and on the other, we do have Sousa's deep and dreamy eyes, of which
Brilliant.
We do have to say and call out that is quite correct.
Absolutely, yeah. It's really good. I love that scene in the car with Jarvis and Peggy. It's one of those great things about the Peggy Carter character. All the way back to Captain America: The First Avenger, you've always seen that about Peggy, that she's not willing to show the emotional side because it can just easily be taken as, well, you're emotional because you're a woman. She's always hung with the boys. She's always been the person that's been able to put that side of herself away and just battle along with the Howling Commandos. She's always been the person that's been able to be the leader of a team, of a crack force, essentially. Whereas now it's all just arriving at her doorstep. She's got the choice between two men, which she never thought she would be. I love that she calls it out, that I'm trying to work out exactly what she said. It was something along the lines of that I'm not some chivvy girl here.
Yeah.
Like not some chavvy girl kind of thing.
No, I'm not some sort of chivvy lady who's trying to be a homebreaker, trying to sort of essentially manage two men at once.
Yeah.
She doesn't know what to do, and that's what she's called out to Jarvis, is that I don't know what to do. I have these two quality suitors, as he says. And I mean, again, yeah, loads of kind of expressions here, like sticky wicket. She's on a sticky wicket.
That moment on Twitter, as we were watching and live tweeting the episode, as we do every week on Thursdays, when Jarvis says you're on a sticky wicket in relation to Sousa and Wilkes, I have to say on Twitter, it was really funny. Even though we're watching it in the UK, there are still tons of people who have no idea that that's a 1950s phrase connected to cricket particularly. And we just saw about 5 or 6 people that are chatting on Twitter about the episode going, what the heck does that mean?
It means it's difficult.
Yeah,
it means
exactly.
it's
just
difficult.
a difficult situation, again, to do with cricket, which I don't know much about, I must say.
You can't dispatch the ball to the boundary or get the runs, because it's a difficult wicket to read. A sticky wicket.
Very good. See?
So she's got a problem. She can't make the decision. She can't get the ball to the boundary to get the points because she doesn't know what to do. And it's perfect phrase, that you would expect Jarvis at this moment in time, in the 50s to use, in relation to this. So yeah, a lot of Britishisms, I suppose, coming out here, chivvy, all of these kind of things. It's just really, really, good. It really places it in this 50s moment, which is really good.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Derek, what's your next point?
My next point is the sense of humor in this episode. A little risque this episode, a little more risque than usual. In fact, I think would be the best term for it. We have a great moment early on in the episode when Jarvis is speaking to Peggy and says that he's learnt some engineering by just hanging around with Howard Stark. You always pick up something if you're hanging around with Howard. And Peggy says, I'm surprised you didn't pick up the clap. Nice and fun little gag there. And then later, the other one that I picked out from this episode, which I just couldn't stop laughing at, was when Jarvis is trying to work out why he couldn't get the jitterbug working when he's put in the 6-digit code for, to make it work as he's done before, and then realizes that those are in fact the measurements of Carol Lombard rather than Barbara Stanwyck, because the measurements for Barbara Stanwyck make the jitterbug do something very different, which is a delayed detonation. Absolutely brilliant moment. I love that it's there for definitely the adults in the room. I know a ton of people who watch the show with their kids and they'd never understand this concept of the measurements and what Howard's done. And I love that it's a Howard Stark thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it fits so nicely that it's Howard Stark using women's measurements to code up different functions of the jitterbug machine. And I mean, like, shout out to the jitterbug. Loved it. I mean, I loved this, this kind of bulky little sort of portable machine. Still portable, but still nonetheless, it looked a bit bulky. Like, great. I loved it.
It was fabulous. But the scene itself, when Jarvis puts it down beside the pool as the men are running towards him, I still don't understand why he was waiting so long to press the button. He was kind of, he's trying to get as many people in front of it as possible, definitely. But by the time he actually started entering the code, one of the guys was pointing a gun at his head and was stopped. He was definitely waiting a little bit too long, but was overly excited by having this fantastic weapon that Howard had created. It's just, that's the way it came across to me. Really, really enjoyed it. But the sense of humor in this episode, and fair dues to Brandon Easton. I know he worked with Eric Pearson, who wrote last week's episode. I know the two of them specifically worked on this episode, but this is Brandon Easton's episode, and just a little more risque on the humor this time, which I really enjoyed. So well done there. John, do you want to give us your next point?
My next point is definitely the three Graces, Whitney, Dottie, and Peggy. For me, the three ladies here were absolutely awesome. Mm-hmm. Again, it comes from the last episode as well. I just can't get enough of these three on screen. Whether it's the start of the episode where Whitney Frost is in all black with the veil. I mean, I just loved the dress and the veil there. It just was so evocative, I thought.
Yeah.
Really nice. And just the fact that that behind all of that, it's an act for the cameras and for the press, I just thought was really, really good.
Yeah, she's doing it because she's saying that her husband has died at sea along with the other members of the Arena Club. Essentially, that's the cover story that they've created.
Yes, another yachting accident for the rich and famous of LA.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the fact that I've mentioned this before, this contrast of her kind of porcelain or weak and vulnerability that she has, or she can project. But underneath this then, and this is one of the big highlights for this episode for me, was when she's with Vernon Masters, but in particular with Dottie, where she feigns a sympathy or an empathy with Dottie in the interrogation room. She really kind of makes Dottie kind of believe that, okay, well, I can wrap this one around my finger like I did with Vernon Masters.
Yeah.
And then she just goes and applies her palm to her face and uses the zero matter to, frighten the bejesus out of Dottie Underwood, quite frankly. And I loved that scene. It was just this power play between these two strong women. Was awesome. It really, you don't see that very often on TV. The power play is always between the men, or, it's the power play of the man against the woman. This we have a fantastic power play between Dottie and Whitney, of which Whitney, as I say, frightens Dottie to death. And starts the tracker to lay the trap. So for me, this was just great.
Absolutely. And I love that Peggy calls it out later on that now Dottie is terrified of Whitney. She's never seen her afraid of anything before. And now suddenly she sees her totally afraid of Whitney Frost because of what she's done to her. Because, this is something that's completely out of nowhere for Dottie. She's not been involved in the zero matter stuff. She's not been involved in these kind of superhuman people that have been around her. Her previous handler had got some a power effectively, but not in the league of Whitney Frost in this series. So there's a great moment when Peggy calls that out and has realized that she knows Dottie so well that there's definitely something that set her on edge.
No, absolutely. And I think as well, then we have the dialogue between Dottie and Peggy after Peggy and Jarvis have been captured. I love that whole scene for me. Firstly, you have kind of Dottie going, yeah, blood. I was supposed to get a blood sample. Yeah, right. You know, she's now aware of the absolute difference in the reality of what Whitney is compared to what Peggy said to her to get her on board. Yeah. And then I just love the frantic race to try and get, untied and unbound from the chairs. And of course, Jarvis wins the day. I love that. I love how he's kind of like, I'm free. And they're still trying to get, the ties and the binds off their ankles. I think really good, that race. You see the race between the two, between Peggy and Dottie. I just thought it was excellent. And for me, this all goes in with the three Graces that make up Agent Carter this season, and that's Whitney, Dottie, and Peggy. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, one of the points I had about the race to get out of the chairs as well is the fact that Dottie threatens Jarvis. That's effectively what she's saying is, if I get out of this chair before you do, Jarvis is dead. But Jarvis is the one that gets out first, which I loved. I thought that was really good. And I wonder if it's just because Whitney completely underestimated Jarvis, that's why he's tied up in a different way than the two ladies, you know? She knows the strength of Peggy. She knows the strength of Dottie. She doesn't really know the strength of Jarvis. She just assumes he's a butler. So he gets tied up slightly more loosely than the two ladies do. But I like that. Thought it was a great scene. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. So Derek, what's your next point?
My next point is about one of the characters that you've mentioned a few times, Roberto Manfredi. Given how villainous Whitney Frost and Dottie Underwood are, I kind of expected that they would be the ones that you're supposed to dislike or supposed to hate. I love those characters. I love how developed those characters are. Roberto Manfredi comes on the screen for about 2 scenes within this episode, and my skin was crawling with his attitude and with his dealing specifically with Wilkes in this episode. He walks into the room as Whitney Frost is talking to Wilkes, saying to him effectively, yeah, okay, you might be a scientist, but you're just as bad as me. You're a black man in a scientific company. They gave you the chance just to make up the numbers, just the kind of thing they do with women as well. You're nowhere. And then Manfredi walks in and says, oh, Dr. Wilkes, doing the air quotes kind of thing. A black scientist. I've seen everything now. And that moment just sent kind of chills up my spine that there's people like this, or that there were definitely people like this in the 50s that would be looking at a hugely intelligent man directly in his moment almost of triumph. He's created something that has never been created before. Clearly a very intelligent man, and he's being cut down instantly by this thug. As he walks into the room, a great performance by the actor in the role. I must say, because I know he's been in comedies before. He's got a very different style in most shows he's been in before. But there's 2 scenes now that he's been in. One last time we saw him where he killed one of his guards for looking at Whitney Frost the wrong way, and this time now. Truly,
it's the casual racism that he's doing of that era where, you know, it's even that he doesn't understand the nuanced conversation that Whitney Frost is having with Wilkes, because that's still a tough conversation that she's having. She's laying it bare as to, you know, why did you think you were employed? I mean, this is kind of one of my points, actually, that conversation that Whitney has with Wilkes is really tough, where she lays it bare about the reality of why he was employed by Isodyne. But that kind of goes over Manfredi's head, and he is a man of his time, a product of his upbringing. He is, and not willing to change. He's violent, he's bigoted, and he's more than likely, which comes out in this episode, just inherently racist. He's he probably would be anti-Semitic. He would be a whole host of other things. You know, so like he's just, he makes your skin crawl because it's inherent, it's his nature in him. And it's that kind of the worst trait of human nature, in a sense, to have those kind of views.
Absolutely. And I know we're 7 episodes into the show. I know we're coming into the end game for the series. Dottie's now in the wind. I'm kind of getting that feeling. Yes, I know Whitney Frost is the big villain of the show, but I'm kind of going, I love the character. So I'm kind of hoping they hold on to her. They don't kill her at the end. They put her in prison or something like that. Whereas Manfredi, I want to see him get his just desserts, probably at the hands of Jason Wilkes as he gets more powerful in his use of zero matter. I'm kind of hoping that something will be taken out on Manfredi as we go through the end of the series. So
just coming back to the tough conversation, I mean, I thought that was excellent, and it's not just with Wilkes. Whitney calls out Jane Scott as well, the lady in the lake, and she goes, "A woman and a coloured man. Why do you think you were hired by Isodyne? You're easily manipulated. You would be compliant because of the chance that you've been given. But you're also expendable. And I think as well, she teased that kind of reality up to then really make a pitch to Wilkes where she kind of says, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I'm trying to use zero matter for people like you and me who haven't been given this opportunity, to become equal, to show the world that just because I'm a woman, just because Jane Scott was a woman, or because you're a black man, that you are no weaker, you're no different or more or less successful than any other person if we can use this zero matter. Now, it's intriguing to see what she still wants to do with it. I mean, it's just simply at this moment in time, are those lofty goals really her goal? Or is it simply a goal of zero matter, to open up these fissures again so that the zero matter can go back through the fissure to where it came from? Or is the direction of travel going to be the other way, to bring this dark force into the human realm?
Yeah, absolutely. Great scene, definitely. And I also loved, just a little point, I also loved what happens when Whitney tries to use the zero matter on Wilkes, and the connection between the two the zero matter inside Wilkes and the zero matter inside Whitney, showing that Wilkes, even though he doesn't know it, is just as strong and as powerful as Whitney. A great moment, really, really enjoyable. And I'm absolutely convinced, in fact, that we're going to see more of that in the next and final 3 episodes.
That was really cool because, again, it plays into what you were saying about maybe Wilkes becomes so desperate that he's willing to join forces with Whitney, that there's almost a kindred spirit, because that's the way I kind of felt Whitney saw him at that moment where she realized that he could combat her. It was, you're like me, that kindred spirit element, that connection between the two. And so I wonder, will Wilkes move increasingly through Whitney now? I mean, it's an interesting thing that could happen. Whether it does or not, I can't wait to find out.
Absolutely. That's kind of my points on it. John, do you have a final point?
Yeah, I've got one final point, and that's really Sousa and Vernon. Vernon comes in here and essentially relieves Sousa as the chief of the LA SSR branch, and also presumably sends in those heavies to beat him up. Or, I was trying to think, are those heavies from Vernon or Manfredi's? I mean, I wasn't entirely sure, but I assume it's Vernon's.
I think the direction is given by Vernon. But they probably are Manfredi's men.
But I kind of really just, that to and fro between Vernon and Sousa, where Sousa's trying to kind of resist him to go after the uranium rods that he, along with Peggy, had stolen from the Roxxon facility. But now, Vernon just essentially sidelines him. He puts him to one side, and that's it. He beats him up and strips him of his rank in the SSR at this moment in time, puts it on hold. So this is really interesting as to now, will Sousa just, on annual leave, do the same thing that Peggy is doing? So I'm really interested to see how that works out. But that was another little small side plot happening during this episode, which, again, with Sousa having a disability, a war disability, then he too is being sidelined by society. He is viewed differently as well. And I think it's a really, important, at least in the eyes of Vernon, I think it's a really, interesting kind of, additional element to this whole show and to Sousa's character as well.
Absolutely.
So, Derek, do you have a final point or note on this episode?
Yes, my final point is Jarvis in this episode. We see a very different side of our wonderful Edwin Jarvis.
Absolutely.
When he realizes that his wonderful Anna is in trouble.
It's the big thing, really, isn't it? It's just like Jarvis switches on a dime, becomes the all-action hero Jarvis, uses the jitterbug to knock out one of Manfredi's thugs at the compound, picks up the gun and is like, come on, we have to go and save my wife and stop anything bad happening.
Yeah, it's very much how he shuts down the conversation between Peggy and Dottie as well. It's just the reaction to him where he's just going, just shut up, we don't have time for this, we must save Anna, I don't care what you guys have between you kind of thing. And unfortunately he doesn't get there in time, so Anna is shot in the stomach and put down to the ground. I don't believe she's dead. I think that Whitney is trying to do everything she can to keep Jarvis and Peggy occupied. I don't think she's trying to kill Anna. There does seem to be, as you mentioned earlier on, about the kind of the loftier goals of Whitney. She doesn't seem to see herself as a villain. Obviously, she's not just there for power. But this conversation with Anna is kind of saying to her, I'm going to have to use you as a way of slowing them down in my path so I can complete my plan kind of thing.
Yeah, because Manfredi is all for just shooting Anna and that's it. He has that kind of bloodlust underlying everything he does as a complete and utter thug. Whereas Whitney kind of holds him back there. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I really just like the fact that, this is happening to Jarvis. He's been called the comedy foil of everything. And it is one of those things that comedy and tragedy are close bedfellows.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have that. And I think it makes it more powerful knowing how light Jarvis's character can be in terms of the witticisms, the actions, the comedic element to it. And now that person of lightness, of deafness, is ravaged by tragedy of a loved one, a close loved one, his wife, Anna. So this is really, really good kind of contrast for Jarvis's character and one that really adds to it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose the fact that it was called out that Anna needs to let him have his moments of excitement and adventure. I don't think it's ever crossed his mind that she could be in danger. By him going off and doing these adventures with Peggy, he was putting himself in danger and Anna's letting him go and do it. And that's fine. And he's kind of, understanding now that she's not able to accept that he may not come back from one of these missions with Peggy. While he was in the army, she obviously does see him as her husband and doesn't want to lose him just because she's going off on these adventures with Peggy. But I don't think it ever crossed his mind that Anna would be in danger, and I like that it's called out here. I like that he's suddenly been confronted with actually the real
the reality of what they do, that it can affect those close to home.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's a nice bookend to what Anna was feeling in the last episode, where Jarvis goes off to the arena club to try and get the vial of zero matter from Whitney Frost. She suddenly becomes concerned about his safety, where he's looking for a gun and for, a cane with a sword in it. And she has that slight element of doubt that everything he's doing is not safe and that he could get harmed. And now in that moment where he realizes that the trap is sprung against Wilkes, he realizes that his wife is in danger as well and rushes off. And I love that kind of bookending of these characters who, is just so good.
Yeah, absolutely. Overall, that's all of my points. Any other notes or points for you, John?
No, I think I've covered everything that I wanted to, yeah. So, Derek, do you defend this episode of Agent Carter?
I really do. A little bit of a darker episode. I think overall we're left at the end of this episode with Anna Jarvis shot, with Sousa deposed in his position and effectively beaten in his own home. Dottie's escaped now. She's in the wind. And obviously Peggy and Jarvis are now stuck in the hospital with Anna. Peggy's not fully back to full health, as we see throughout this episode. She's still not back to full health from when she was attacked by Whitney Frost. So things aren't looking great for the team, but that makes a great episode. There's also some great humor within the episode, as I mentioned, really good interplay between the characters that we see. We see a much darker side of Vernon Masters in here. So a really good kind of midway point is a little after the midway, but a really good midway point kind of leading into the last 3 episodes of this season. I absolutely defend this episode. And John, do you defend this episode of Agent Carter?
I do. I really do defend this episode of Agent Carter, and I have to be kind of a bit cautious about my ranking here because I am just absolutely in the groove and loving this show at the moment. It offers everything up to me in comedy, tragedy, great characterization, standalone episodes, but all moving into a nice single through storyline as well.
Yeah.
For me, this is like one of my favorite shows on TV at the moment. And that is why I'm giving this episode 4.5 jitterbugs out of 5. It has the comedy and tragedy element with Jarvis and Anna. It's got these 3 amazing actresses or actors in the 3 Graces that I'm calling them, Dottie, Peggy, and Whitney.
Mm-hmm.
And just the whole interaction and scenes that they have together or individually are absolutely excellent. We have this real intimate moment with Peggy between her and a conversation between her and Jarvis, which is just a really nice little insight into the character. We have the rescue of Dottie and it being questioned by Wilkes. We have Wilkes being kidnapped and Anna being shot. So much going on.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we have more development of Vernon Masters, and we see the Sousa storyline really taking a different turn than I was expecting. I mean, I almost wasn't expecting to see as much of Sousa in this episode than what we got, and it'll be interesting now to see how that plays out in the next episode. And Dottie is once again free in the wind. How will she impact Whitney's plan? Will she do it for Mother Russia, or will she do it to help Peggy? I mean,
or is she just going to get as far away as possible?
Absolutely. So all of these things are just, for me, fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'm really, really enjoying this series. I loved this episode again. So for me, absolutely 4.5 jitterbugs out of 5. And I absolutely defend this episode of Agent Carter.
Yeah, really enjoyable episode. With that, I think we can go into a little bit of feedback. If you want to send in your feedback on Agent Carter or any of the other shows that we cover, obviously just send it into feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com. Our first piece of feedback comes from one of the writers of Agent Carter, Eric Pearson, who sent us a message on Twitter after hearing our episode last week, and says, to the gentlemen of Defenders TV Podcast, thank you so much for all the kind words and smart analysis. Loved the podcast. Really nice. Thanks very much for that, Eric.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much, Eric. Yeah, it's really nice to hear. Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. Eric Pearson is the one that brought Peggy Carter to life in the one-shot special that effectively got the show commissioned into a 2-series show. So delighted to hear that you listened to our podcast and enjoyed it. Thank you very much for that.
We also received some feedback from Doug Green. He says, you keep those vacuum-powered syringes, Derek. I can see that going all kinds of wrong, and I'm not scared of needles.
So I mentioned last week that Jason Wilkes had created a vacuum-powered syringe to take the blood of Whitney Frost. And it's something that you always see in things like Star Trek and that kind of thing, that this is the future of syringes, that you won't have to see the big needle as they press into your body to take blood, you know? And I've always wondered why we don't have them now, because it looks like such a simple, quick thing. So, yeah. Okay, Doug. I obviously am alone in that one. But thanks very much for your feedback.
Well, and you do scream whenever you have blood taken.
Yeah, I'm not great with needles, I must say.
No, you certainly aren't. And finally, we have some Deadpool feedback from Stephanie Stiles. In relation to the discussion of villains in Marvel movies, she says, I think that villains are harder to create. If you want them to be more than tropes, you see it done phenomenally well by Marvel in the Netflix shows because they have time and latitude for deep character development. In the movies, they can't afford to spend the time on developing villains because they instantly need to align your sympathies with the hero. A truly good villain, see the Purple Man, Kingpin from the Marvel Netflix shows, also elicits sympathy from the audience. In a 2-hour film, that would break up the momentum in the hero's usually accelerated journey. Absolutely. I think it is difficult to get baddies, villains in films right. I think normally they're done maybe over the course of a number of sequels. If you think of, say, Darth Vader in the Star Wars trilogy, the original trilogy, he goes obviously from real bad guy to really seeing that he wasn't always that way, and you get that sympathy. Or you have the alternate where someone like the Joker in the Batman films has so much history, is so well known that there's almost a shorthand to everything surrounding the Joker that he can then be introduced into a film almost with a minimum of fuss. Whereas if you're starting to generate new villains, then it's difficult. But it can be done if you can do it either by shorthand or maybe over a sequence of films. But I would completely agree. I think good villains always have a side which should resonate with the audience, or at least show some kind of sympathy. That idea of the light side and the dark side, I suppose, it is a truly important piece to the villain. Absolutely.
Yeah, and very difficult to do, as we did mention in our Deadpool coverage. While we were talking about a comedy film, we just were mentioning the fact that the villain of that movie was almost completely cut out of it. It's kind of the only scenes that he had on screen were ones that he shared with Deadpool, where Deadpool got most of the dialogue and he just was there to punch him, basically. So not a huge criticism of the Deadpool movie as such, but just a kind of a discussion that we had about all of the Marvel films overall, that the villains tend to be a little bit more underdeveloped than we see in the wonderful TV shows that we've been covering. So thanks very much for that feedback, Stephanie.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And remember, please keep sending in your feedback, as Derek said at the beginning, to feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com. And we will air that on our episodes of Defenders TV Podcast.
Yeah.
I think with that, it's on to the Civil War trailer.
Yeah, we had tons of stuff happen this week, but we will just focus on the Civil War trailer. But first off, we had the Daredevil premiere happened in Paris this week for Europe. The Daredevil premiere happened in New York for the American coverage. So lots of interviews with the cast and people behind the show, which is really interesting to watch before we get to see the episodes from the 18th of March. And then another quick announcement before we get into Civil War. We now have a date for Luke Cage. And
absolutely.
When he's coming to Netflix.
September.
Yeah, not Sweet Christmas. It'll be the 30th of September when we get all 13 episodes of the Luke Cage TV show, the third of our Defenders joining the team over on Netflix. So excited to see what they're going to be doing with Luke Cage.
Yeah, sweet September. Absolutely. And just before New York Comic Con in early October. So will there be a Luke Cage kind of little aspect to the Marvel panels at New York Comic Con? Mm-hmm. And when I say that, I mean more likely to bring in Iron Fist, possibly.
I know. I'm hoping for an Iron Fist Luke Cage panel at New York Comic Con. It'd be great, wouldn't it?
Me too. And certainly now knowing that Jessica Jones season 2 is going to happen, we may even know at that stage whether there is a season 3 of Daredevil, possibly. I mean, it's mind-blowing what could actually happen at New York Comic Con this year in relation to the Marvel Netflix shows.
We are crossing our fingers that we'll get tickets and go along for our third year running to New York Comic Con.
Absolutely. I think it was on our Facebook group when Ronaldo there had said that, Jeff Loeb was saying how there were 10 shows in the mix here, including Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Carter, possibly if it gets renewed. So, there's so many different shows that could be happening that are Marvel related. So it's excellent to see what comes out of the ether. But I'm looking forward to a Iron Fist, Luke Cage kind of bromance going on at New York Comic Con this year.
Absolutely. And finally, the big one for this week is the Civil War trailer came out. Captain America Civil War, the third in the trilogy of Captain America films. The trailer came out this week. First off, John, what did you think of the trailer?
Really, really liked it. I think it's built on all the other trailers previously and the Super Bowl spot as well. The whole united we stand, divided we fall aspect to this this movie. I loved it.
So as we go in for the discussion of the Captain America Civil War trailer, there will be some spoilers probably coming out of what we're talking about. Not too many, because we obviously haven't seen it. Neither has anybody else in the world, luckily.
Yeah, it's theories. It's fan theories. So, I mean, let's see what happens. Will they come true, or will they just be absolute random and wild speculation?
Like our usual
exactly.
thoughts on what might happen in the future. But if you want to stick with us, we'll be going through those thoughts. If not, we will talk to you next week for the next Agent Carter podcast.
Absolutely. So, Derek, what are your thoughts on this new trailer?
I really, really enjoyed it, just because it's a trailer, but it is probably the last big trailer we're going to see, and had some of the big reveals that we were looking forward to the whole time. Obviously cannot continue without mentioning the introduction of our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. I thought that was fantastic. I loved, firstly, that Iron Man, Tony Stark, has already got a nickname for him. He's calling him Underoos, which is a nice little joke on the fact that he's the only one wearing a full head to toe costume. I also like the fact that Marvel have made the decision to animate the eyes of Spider-Man. So to give him a little bit more feeling, or a little bit more, acting ability within being behind.
It's like mask. The eyes with Deadpool. It just gives an idea, or helps with the expression of what they're feeling: anger, happiness, tragedy, sorrow, all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. There is a bit of speculation out there that they are animated because Tony Stark has used some of his technology to develop this suit for Spider-Man, much like in the comic books. This is the reason that he's on the side of Tony Stark, because Tony's developed a great new suit for him and explained to him why this act, that's the Registration Act that's being enacted, is right for Spider-Man to be on the right side of, I suppose. I don't know how much we're going to see Spider-Man in the movie, but I do like that this is possibly a nod to the fact that Tony is using his technology to help out Peter Parker.
Yeah, I think that was a nod or a shout out on our Facebook page as well from David Wang, who wondered whether Stark Tech was involved in the Spidey suit. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Fantastic little entrance there of Spider-Man. Really intrigued to see how much of Spider-Man we get in this film. For me as well, I loved the Winter Soldier again. We see definitely, him firing a gun at Stark's face. That was in one of the earlier trailers. He seemed to be incarcerated in the Raft, I think, is the big facility in the middle of the ocean. Mm-hmm. So is he presumably captured for something, for a crime he didn't commit, to go all A-team for a little moment, and he's broken out of this facility by Captain America and his group. And we do also see, I think maybe it's just editing, but does Winter Soldier shoot down Iron Patriot?
That is possible. Yeah.
It looked like it from the trailer, but obviously it could simply be some editing here. So really, really liked that. And I kind of really liked that Tony Stark's dialogue of, "I want to punch you in your perfect white teeth." I'm glad that was put into context, actually, where, Captain America is kind of saying, if I think that or feel that something's heading south, I have to respond to that. I can't just simply say no. And we have that great scene where New York, Sokovia, and Washington DC are all called out by General Ross.
Yeah.
And
returning from the Incredible Hulk. That's quite cool.
Yeah, it's really, really good. I love the expression on Falcon's face, he kind of seems to get affected by it, certainly. And so does Scarlet Witch when he mentions Sokovia, obviously where her brother was killed. Yeah. So that was a really nice little scene, I think, that put things into context for this movie, and probably, forms the genesis of the Civil War.
Yeah.
What's so civil about war anyway, as Guns N' Roses says.
Very true, very true. Just two other little things that I wanted to mention. Absolutely loved, and I think a couple of our listeners had their minds blown by the inclusion of a great moment where Hawkeye uses one of his arrows loaded up with Ant-Man in his small size on top of it. Very, very, very famous comic book cover and moment between those two former Avengers.
Fantastic. That was cool. That was very cool.
And one of the other great moments as well is Scarlet Witch versus Vision. Vision was the all-powerful character in Age of Ultron. Cool. And having Scarlet Witch being able to take on that power, shows how powerful she is. Those two characters are married in the comic books, or were married for many years. They have a huge relationship, or a huge long-term relationship that they've had in the comic books. So nice to see a scene with the two of them go mano a mano, as you would see in comic books. Yeah, really, really good. Really cool. So great fun trailer. It is just a trailer at the end of the day. That is no definition of quality. It's just a definition of marketing. We totally understand that. So, but right now I am so excited to go and see that.
Lots of cool stuff in this. I have to say, I did really like, the Scarlet Witch, smacking down Vision, because I was wondering, well, how do you combat Vision? Who is the person that combats Vision?
Yeah.
And maybe out of this, comes a beautiful relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's the end of this week's episode of Defenders TV Podcast.
Of course. And we will be here next week with another episode of Agent Carter. And of course, the start of our Daredevil Season 2 coverage.
Oh, I can't wait.
As it lands in one nice meaty lump on the 18th of March, courtesy of Netflix, as it's distributed globally in one shot. It's like takeout coming and being delivered to your door. We will obviously be getting it around 8 a.m. In Ireland and the UK.
Yeah.
It will be 9 a.m. for Europe, the rest of Europe, and of course it will be slightly earlier in the evening or nighttime in the US, obviously being 5 hours or plus behind UK and Ireland time-wise. So we will hopefully have...
Other time zones are available. But yeah,
yes, so I'm time zoning it to the max here.
But we will have an event.
People in Asia will have, of course, watched the entire 13 episodes by the time we get to it.
No, they will not, because it's exactly the same time worldwide.
I know,
that's being
I'm
released.
joking.
For us, it's 8 a.m., which works out really well. We do have the day off. We will be podcasting about the first episode on day one of release.
We will have a mega hangover from St. Patrick's Day.
True.
If we slur our words, if we pass out mid-podcast, then we will still be here podcasting away, fighting through it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Looking forward to getting back to the Netflix universe, but still we will be here with our Agent Carter podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on iTunes at defenderstvpodcast.com/iTunes. It'll take you directly to the link to subscribe. You can also subscribe to us on any other good podcast catcher like Podcast Addict, Beyond Pod, or Stitcher. Just look for Defenders TV Podcast, and those episodes of both Agent Carter and Daredevil will appear in your feed as we release them. Looking forward to getting back to it. Again, if you want to send it in your feedback, send it to feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com.
With that, as always, thank you so much for listening. It's been great again to go through this episode of Agent Carter. I'm off to go and play on a sticky wicket. Bye.
Talk to you again soon. Bye. Hi, this is Derek, just back for a little post-credit comment. When we were recording this episode, we completely forgot about the time difference between the US and Ireland being slightly changed. Due to the hour going forward in the US at the weekend of the 13th of March, obviously the time difference means that we will get Daredevil a little bit earlier than we thought. It's going to be arriving at 7 a.m. in Ireland, 8 a.m. in Europe, and all the other time zones will follow suit, as John mentioned. But unfortunately, we hadn't got that piece of knowledge before we recorded the episode. But but anyway, we will be back with our first episode of Daredevil Season 2 next Friday, the 18th of March. Looking forward to talking about it then. Bye.
This has been a Flickering Myth Podcast Network production. For more information, head over to flickeringmyth.com for more shows like it. Find this show in iTunes by searching for the podcast name, and head over to youtube.com/Flickering Myth to subscribe to the Flickering Myth movie show. We'll see you on the next podcast. Take care. Bye bye.